Today, I'm going to show you one of my favorite ways to practice animation. It's easy to draw, it's fast to try out ideas, and I actually use it all the time in my professional work. In fact, I've just released a new Procreate Dreams commission, and I use it a whole bunch in that too. Today, we're animating slime. Now, I can hear what some of you are thinking. I've never really wanted to animate slime, but if you stay with me for this class, I can guarantee you'll start to think of awesome ways you can use these ideas in your own animation. Slime is a great way to practice your animation fundamentals, and it's also the easiest way I know to start experimenting with effects animation. This will really help when you're learning how to animate fire, smoke, and water. I'm not going to say it's better than a bouncing ball, but it's a lot more fun. I've made a totally free download pack, which you can check out in the link below. It's got all of my working files and a bunch of reference footage, which I've shot especially for this class. I'll be animating in Procreate Dreams, but you can use any app you like. I've done an intro class in Procreate Dreams, which is here on YouTube, and there's a more in-depth masterclass in the link below too. The good thing about slime is that it can be as simple or as complex as you like. We can add it to characters, and we can even make it into a character. And most importantly, it's really easy to get started. So let's jump in. We're going to start by animating the simplest thing possible, a single dot. I call it the magic dot, and I have a whole class on it here, but if you haven't seen it, that's totally fine. It only takes a few seconds to explain. The goal is to bring a dot to life with animation. I'll start by opening Procreate Dreams, but as I said, use any app you like. I'll create a new document at 12 frames per second, and I'll make it about 5 seconds long. I'll drag the timeline down here so we enter flipbook mode, which gives us a bit more space to draw. And then I'll draw my first dot. Then I'll go to my next frame and draw my next dot. And if you haven't turned on onion skidding so you can see the frames before, you can turn that on in the bottom left of the screen just here. Then I'll make a new frame and draw a new dot. I'll slowly move the dot across the screen. As it gets further and further apart, it feels like it's moving faster. And as it gets closer and closer together, it feels like it's slowing down. I'll try to keep the dot moving on a nice smooth arc. And I'll experiment with how the motion feels. If it feels too fast, I'll put some extra frames in, and if it feels too slow, I'll take some out. I don't really have a plan at this stage. I'm just letting the dot flow and dance across the screen and just make some interesting motion that feels believable and interesting. You can see here I just wanted to speed up the dot suddenly to add some texture to the motion, and then it slows down again. So this only took a couple of minutes, and I have this nice dot that dances across the screen. This dot is going to be the starting point for our first slime animation. So the slime animation is something I'm going to call the magic blob. It's kind of like the step beyond the magic dot. So I'll quickly select all of my drawings, group them, and turn down their opacity. Then I'll make a new track that we can start animating our magic blob on. Now I'm going to draw a little blobby shape around the dot. You can put as much detail into this blob as you like, but I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple so it's nice and quick to animate. Then I'll go to the next frame and do the same, but we'll let the goo follow the dot as it moves. I want you to think about the dot like a magnet, and it's pulling this goo around. As the dot moves faster, some of the goo might take a moment to catch up to the dot, but it'll all come back together as the dot slows down. That'll give us this gloopy, stretchy feeling. We can use this gloopiness to really highlight the arcs the motion's making through space. While you're drawing the blob, there's one thing I want you to be really careful about. Try to keep the size of the blob consistent. You can experiment with expanding slime like I've done in my Procreate Dreams animation, but do that later. For now, I want you to control the volumes. So if you stretch the goo out, it also needs to get thinner to compensate. If you really stretch the shape out, you can think about breaking parts of the goo off that get left behind. In my case, I've just let them slowly shrink down to nothing, so I don't have to keep animating them. So this is my first pass of the magic blob. I've only been animating for about 10 minutes, and I already have something that's looking alright. One thing I'm not happy with though, is that it's feeling pretty rough. Normally I don't mind having rough animation, but I think slime feels extra slimy if we pay close attention to the spacing of the edges. I've drawn these lines pretty loosely, and I haven't been very careful about creating nice, smooth spacing between each frame. So I think I can do a cleanup pass on this animation to show you how that could work. I'll select the drawings and group them, and I'll make them transparent by tapping the playhead, selecting filter, opacity, and sliding it down. It's best to do this on the first frame of animation so it doesn't change over time. Now I'll make a new track, and for this pass I'll use the syrup brush from the inking section of Procreate Dreams to do the line work. And I'll do a cleaner drawing over my first pass. The thing I'm trying to look at is the spacing between the outlines and controlling them. You can have lots of beautifully drawn frames of animation, but if the spacing is messy, the motion is going to feel rough. You can see here I'm just drawing a little line next to all of the contours of these blobs, and these are the parts of the spacing that I'm looking at. The reason this is a slightly more difficult exercise than the magic dot is because we need to think about spacing of the entire blob. Every contour around the blob needs to be thought about in respect to the previous frames. But because we plan this out using the magic dot, we know that the general spacing of the weight of the blob is going to be pretty right. So all of these extra details are going to be much easier to think about. So I'm paying special attention to the space between the frames, and I'm just letting it slow down and speed up in a controlled way, rather than jitter across the screen. I continue this process for the whole piece of animation. And this is the final result. I would say that from a professional standpoint, this is still a little bit rough, but for this exercise, I think it's totally fine. The last thing I want to do now is just fill in this blob with a color. Different programs will use different approaches to do fills, but in this case, I'm going to duplicate my line work layer and fill the line work layer below. This means that I can adjust the line work layer and the color layer separately. In Dreams, the way you fill things is by dragging this color picker at the top into the shape. And this is the final result. If you want to push yourself even further with this exercise, you could start with multiple dots and see how the slime interacts. I call this exercise the magic blob because it feels like the blob is moving itself around by magic. We don't really get a sense of where the energy is coming from, so it kind of feels magical. When I'm animating, I'm always thinking about how energy is working in a scene. And that's particularly true of effects animation like slime. You can draw slime where the only energy in the scene is gravity pulling it down. Or you could do something like these shots from my short film Phantom Limb, where the slime feels like it's got a mind of its own. The energy is coming from within it, like a character. And while we're looking at examples, maybe now's a good time to show you my full Procreate Dreams commission. It's relatively short, I put it together in about a week and a half, and it features some really nice music from Moon Studio. Now, if you're looking at these examples and thinking, there must be more going on here than what we've covered in the Magic Blob, you'd be totally right. The Magic Blob is an awesome place to start for effects animation, but there are some other big ideas that will really help take your slime to that next level. So let's start by looking at a way that animating slime is different from animating a ball or a character. If I want to make a ball move from here to here, I can put a frame halfway between them, and it's going to start to look all right. The same goes for characters. If we want to turn a character, we can put a frame here, and suddenly, yeah, it's looking like it's working pretty well. Now let's look at this really simple liquid animation. I want to make a wave motion. So I make 2 keyframes. But what comes next? When new animators look at this problem, they'll often try to solve it in the same way that they solve other animation problems, by putting something halfway between these 2 frames. So they'll say, halfway between this point and this point is here, and halfway between this point and this point is here, so if we were to put a frame between them, it should look something like this. And straight away, we can kind of tell that something's wrong, but it can be hard to figure out how to fix it. The big thing with effects animation like slime is that we often need to show energy passing through the thing we're trying to animate. So for fire, it has convection energy traveling upwards, and in liquid animation like slime, we often need to show movement energy moving through the slime in the form of waves. Luckily, we've already started to practice showing energy moving through liquid with dots. The difference with a wave is that we're not moving all of the liquid, we're just moving parts of it. Let's look at this example from my Procreate Dreams animation. We can see we've got energy and mass moving upwards through the slime. If I was to map it out with dots, it would look something like this. So if we go back to our simple wave, and we start thinking about energy moving through the liquid, I can draw a couple of dots and start animating them as though they're energy passing from left to right. When we start to think like this, we can guess that the middle point we're looking for looks less like a straight line and more like this. I've used the most simple wave possible to demonstrate this, but once you understand the basics, you can start applying it to much more complicated animation. Here's a great example by my friend Felix Colgrave, who animated this for his incredible film, Double King. You can see that he's animating the energy flowing through the flag by starting with these really simple shapes first. And speaking of complex animation, the best way to start building detail into your slime is by looking at real slime. And I know this is one of those boring tips that you might want to skip, but one of the most important lessons to learn as an animator is to step away from all of the rules and all of the principles and just watch how real things move. So to help with that, I've recorded a special reference library. It's totally free and it's in the companion pack below. Just observe the shapes and the way things move. See what ideas it inspires. Now that we've covered some of the basics, I wanted to walk you through a more involved animation. And you can see all the theory in practice. This is a scene where I give some slime a mind of its own. This is definitely more advanced than the magic blob, but it's an awesome way to practice your animation skills. And with a little patience, I know you'll be able to achieve something like this. The first thing I do is create a simple background for my slime. Drawing a few perspective grids on the environment will help keep your slime feeling more three-dimensional. When I started, I didn't really have a plan. I just put some slime in the middle of my background and then started animating. The first thing I did was let the slime sit for a moment. One of the challenges with animating slime is that it never really likes to sit still. So I slowly let the slime ooze outwards as gravity pulls it downwards. This takes quite a few frames, but I think it's a nice way to start the scene. Then I decided I wanted the slime to slide sideways. So I do something called leading motion. This is where one part of the character or object moves and then the rest follows it. This is exactly what we were doing with the magic blob earlier, but human characters do it too. They usually do it by leading a motion with their head first, then letting their body follow. You can see I'm letting the trailing slime stick to the ground a little too, rather than just like rolling away like Play-Doh. This gives the audience a clearer idea of what the slime might feel like to touch. As an animator, I'm always looking for ways to let the audience know what the physical sensations in the scene might be. And that's really important for slimy animation, I think. Now I'm having the slime sort of circle the rock as it heads to the top of it. And even though it's heading behind the rock, I'm going to lightly draw it in so that I can make sure that I'm keeping the volumes and the spacing consistent. If I clean this animation up, I won't draw it back in, but it's helpful at this rough stage. I could have taken a more direct route to get to this point of the rock up here, but I think making this route is more interesting and it gives the audience a little bit more time to register what's happening. So I have an admission to make. If I was watching this class, this is the point where I might start to get a little bit annoyed or confused. I mean, we've spent the whole start of the class talking about dots and how important they are, and now the teacher isn't using any of those dots in his actual example. So I had a choice to make here, and I chose to show you how I would actually animate this scene if I was doing it. The reality is I'm thinking about those dots all the time, and in fact I can show you what it would look like if I was using dots. But for something like this, I don't think I would actually plan things out with dots. If I ever get stuck, I use the dots to help me figure out the rest of the scene. So don't feel like you need to use the dots. Don't feel like you need to avoid the dots. Just use them if you find them useful. And I think that if you're just starting out, the dots would be really, really helpful for a scene like this. So let's get back to this scene, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to start to make the slime feel like it's thinking as it's moving around. One way to make slime, or anything you're animating, feel like it has a mind of its own is by letting it pause and make it look like it's thinking. So I'm going to let my slime pause at the top of this rock, and that gives it the sense that it's deciding what to do next. Also, by having fast, slow like this, it gives a little bit of rhythm to the scene. I've decided I want the slime to jump across this gap to the rock that's closer to the audience. For that to work, I want to show that we're building up energy, and that energy is traveling through the blob before it jumps. To do that, I'm going to use a wave motion to show energy passing through the blob. The energy starts traveling from the rear of the slime in the direction that we're going, and then it kind of rolls through the slime and launches into the air. You'll notice that I'm still not using the dots to map this out, but all of those ideas are happening in my mind as I'm drawing. As the slime jumps over this gap, I'm letting it really stretch out to exaggerate the motion a little bit more. So once we land, I'm going to use the same sort of wave motion to bring the mass of the slime up to the top of the rock, and then let it flow back towards camera. I think that creates a nice rhythm, gives it some nice energy, and a little bit of anticipation before it comes towards camera. As this momentum builds up to the top of the rock, you can see I've let it stay a bit sticky to the ground, which once again adds a bit of physical sensation to the scene. And the last moment of this animation, I'm going to use this energy that I've built by going upwards to go down, slide towards camera, and then jump off screen. So we'll slide the slime down the rock and towards camera. And then when we reach this foreground rock, I'm going to anticipate downwards and kind of squish it down, and that'll help with the jump off screen. As we jump off screen, I'm really going to stretch it out and show the gooiness of the slime. You can see that I'm adding gooiness here by adding a bit more detail to the slime. That kind of gives it that stretchy, oozy feeling. And this is the final result of my rough pass. You can see it could definitely use a lot of cleaning up and polish, but I think we get a lot of energy and interesting ideas just from this little exercise. You may have noticed that we've animated all the slime using a technique called straight ahead animation. This is where we animate one frame after the other. If you want to know more about the advantages and disadvantages of straight ahead animation, I've made a whole video on that here. And if you want to know more about my process for keyframe animation, you can check that out here. And once again, if you want to know more about animating in Procreate Dreams, you can check out the links below for different kinds of classes that I've done just on that. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you next time.